Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 17.
In this episode, Daisy's going to share something of interest with us. Daisy, what do you have for us today?
Well, Terry, this week I have a podcast episode from one of your favorites, Lewis Howes's The School of Greatness. It's number 985. He's recorded a lot of podcasts.
Yes.
I can't quite imagine being up at number 985.
It's been like 7 years or 9 years or something, I think.
It must have been. Long time. So, episode number 985, which is called How to Read People and Make Winning Decisions with Maria Konikova. I hadn't heard of Maria Konikova, but apparently she is a Russian-American writer and psychologist. She has a BA in psychology and creative writing from Harvard and a PhD in psychology from Columbia. She's also New York Times best-selling author and contributor to the New Yorker magazine. She's written 3 books, all of which sounds super interesting, and I think I'm probably going to read. The first one was called Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, which explores ways to improve mindfulness, logical thinking, and observation using, shocker, Sherlock Holmes as an example. Her second book is called The Confidence Game, Why We Fall for It Every Time, and that explores the psychology of con artists. Her third book, and this is the book that they're talking about in the podcast, is called The Biggest Bluff, How I Learned to Pay Attention, Master Myself, and Win. And this delves into the science of decision making and documents her journey to becoming a successful competitive poker player. So yes, it's this latest book that was the subject of the podcast. And she talked about how she's really interested in luck and the role it plays in our lives, how to spot it and tell the difference between what we control and what we don't, where our skill ends and where luck and chance begins. So this was the general idea in her head about her next book. This is what she wanted to write about. And this led her to look into John von Neumann's game theory. And through reading that, she discovered that he loved poker and reckoned that it is the perfect analogy for strategic decision making. He said that if you solve poker, you solve life and understand human decision making. And she talks about the difference between poker and chess. Chess being a game where you can see everything. It's all there right in front of you on the chessboard. And there is a right move. And given enough knowledge and experience, you can win the game. But she says in poker, it's very different. So much of it is hidden. And because of this, it becomes a game of people. A game of information and intentions. And she thought, well, this is a great premise for a book. And so she decided to use her journey to becoming a competitive poker player as a way to look more deeply at skill versus chance and the whole process of decision making. One of the biggest topics was luck. Obviously, it's something that you think of, especially with something like poker. People talk about having luck. And she starts off by saying that we tend to ignore just how large a role luck plays in all of our lives. Just being born at all, and the fact that we are born now in this current time to certain parents, where we're born, what we look like, so on. All these things, so much of our lives that we take for granted is actually pure luck. And she said that people's opinions about luck depend a lot on where they're from and what their context is. And poker teaches you to focus on what you can control. That is your decisions. These are things that you can take responsibility for. But outcome is luck. She did mention in this respect that we should not feel shame about our luck. our luck of circumstance or outcome, as we have no control of that. What we can do, though, is potentially help restore some balance by using what luck you have to help other people who maybe don't have as much. And she goes on to talk about attitudes towards outcome and luck. And she talks about a psychology term called locus of control, and the difference between internal locus and external locus, and the different ways people react to good and bad things happening. So you get one person who, if something good happens, they say, yes, I'm good. I deserve this. I worked hard for this. And if something bad happens, that same person might say, oh, that was just bad luck. It had nothing to do with me, and they'll blame external factors. This is actually probably the most common type, particularly in America, which is the context they were talking about. But the other type of person, if something good happens, instead of being like the former person, they would say, oh, that was just good luck. So they would put the good thing happening on external factors. It was luck. If something bad happens, however, they're more likely to say, that was my fault. It becomes the internal locus. And she says, for this type of person, that can be much more psychologically damaging and potentially lead to things like depression. And obviously, where they're talking about the framework of the book, and the framework was poker. So she goes backwards and forwards talking about poker, but the idea is to relate that to different things that happen in life as well. So they flip between the two. She says what's really important is to focus on the process, not the outcome. Poker, she says, is a game of skill over the long term, but luck is a much bigger factor in the short term. And the key is to focus on the process. It's important to concentrate on the things that you can change and making the best decisions possible, the things that you can control and affect. And she very much ties luck to outcome. And she says, be aware of how much luck impacts outcomes, but still work hard on the process, because that is the part that has the real meaning. This also tends to make us kinder to others when we apply this to them as well as ourselves. This next bit made me think about you, because we've had some conversations about this. And she's talking about luck as being in the right place at the right time to spot opportunities. But she says it's more than that you have to put in the work and the preparation and be present and pay attention so that you can spot those opportunities. She's talking about how our brains are wired to be pulled in different directions and to be aware of everything that's going on around us. So its default is to be distracted, which is why, of course, that she laughed at him. She asked him how many tabs he had open in his browser at the moment. She says, no, don't answer that. It's very easy to be distracted. And we've talked about this in previous episodes. And it takes a lot more energy to just focus on one thing and give it our undivided attention. But this is where you best spot opportunities, when you're present and paying attention. And potential opportunities, of course, are everywhere. And they talked about being aware of something that might be for you, but also be open-minded and not to fixate too much on one path that you have laid out for yourself, but be open to adapting and changing your life if the right opportunities arise. There were lots of things that they covered in the podcast, and I couldn't cover them all, but I thought this one was interesting, and it was talking about emotional reactions, which obviously are very important when you're playing poker. You would have heard poker face. It's important not to react or not to have certain tells that give the other players a clue about what you might be holding in your hand or what you're thinking about doing. And she talked about how she worked with a mental coach to learn how to control her reactions. And they had her fill in spreadsheets that drove her a bit nuts, that broke down the different emotional reactions she had into really detailed steps. She had to learn how to pay attention to herself as well as others so that she could recognize situations that were likely to trigger a reaction before they happened and work out strategies to deal with them. Because she said, once you're in it, it's too late. She said it's really important to read your body and the signs it's sending you, to be aware. That awareness is key and is proportion-wise probably the most important element. It's key to think in advance. Most people think they can just deal with something as and when it happens. But once you're in the situation, it's already too late. And you're likely too emotional to recognize that you're too emotional. So you need to recognize the earliest warning signs and treat those with prepared strategies. And she actually used the example of migraines, which obviously resonated with me, and how she'd learned to identify the really early stages of getting a migraine and to act on it at the earliest possible time. And I know that the longer you leave it, the worse it's going to be. Whatever your strategies are for dealing with a migraine, she mentioned different things like meditation and sleep and obviously medication as well. And all these things, it works better the earlier you do it. But you could apply that to anything. She just used that as an example. And he went on to talk about, ask her how important preventative habits and routines were. And she mentioned a strategy called implementation intentions. You have an intention. How are you going to implement it? She gets people to use if-then statements. If X happens, then I can do Y or Z to make sure that my intention still happens. So you think about things that could get in the way and how you're going to react to them. How to choose the best strategies depends a bit on your personality. She used a typical example about you might have the intention that you're going to go to the gym, 3 times a week. You think about all the things that could possibly get in the way. Things that you might use an excuse not to go. If it rains, I'm going to make sure I've got an umbrella with me so I can still go. If this happens, what am I going to do to make sure it's still going to happen? And depending on your personality, there are different strategies you can use. So one of the most powerful is public accountability. And even more powerful, this tickled me, is to tie it to a financial outcome that is both unpleasant and impactful to you. And she cited making a donation that it has to be an amount that is going to hurt. And it has to be to an organization that you really don't like. And you have to put that money somewhere that you can't access. So there's a really high motivation. And she says, always choose the hardest option so there's no getting out of it. It's more motivating and you've got more chance for growth. But it does depend on your personality type. It's not going to work for everybody. And learning to manage your emotions doesn't mean that they're going to go away. It just means that you've learned to anticipate them and to anticipate the responses to them. And she spoke about a concern that I think a lot of us have. What if I fail? And she said, you've already succeeded by challenging yourself to do something. The outcome doesn't matter. It's important to divorce yourself from the outcome and focus on the process. Process, not outcome, because that is the part that you can control. Make the best decisions you can, do these things, and you've won. In the long term, it's the process that matters. The goal has to be making the process the best you can and of benefit to others, not to try and manipulate an outcome. If you focus on the experience and not the destination, and be motivated by that and by things that you can control, this is more likely to be meaningful to you and make you happy than pursuing outcomes that you can't control. Be present in the present. Live your life by what you care about and not what you think leads to a good outcome. That was something that really struck home to me. And I don't think it's always easy to do. Kind of sounds easy in theory, but I guess it maybe, and she did mention money. She mentioned money in the framework of poker, that if you were too focused on it, the guy she trained with told her that as soon as you put the money down to play the game, you have to accept that it's gone. It can't be part of your decision-making process. If you let the financial outcome be part of the decision-making process, those emotions will cloud the decisions you make. And they won't be the best decisions that you can make in the game. And money's a difficult one. But she referred to it again as not focusing on the outcome, not focusing on the financial outcome, but focusing on the process and making the process the best that you can. It's a tricky one because sometimes money can be overwhelming, and I can understand why you need to focus on that as an outcome. But I can definitely see the logic and the importance of the focus being on the process.
And I'm thinking of just other things in life that you and I might talk about, like if someone's goal is focused on weight loss or a health goal. One of the ways I'm thinking about this is oftentimes we get so caught up in how we're going to measure success. And if we're not seeing those measures, lose focus. And it sounds like part of this is getting too caught up on those markers actually interferes with the process, and that we need to continue to stay focused on the process itself.
Yes, and doing the best you can about the process. The process is what's important, and the being in the present is important. Making the best decisions you can in the present. That's what she's saying is important because it's what you have agency over. You have control about the decisions you make. You have control about the process. You can take responsibility for that, and you can control what happens with that. But outcomes are much more tied to luck and to chance. That's what she's saying. And that's why your focus shouldn't be on those, but on the process. And if you focus on that, and if you do the best job you can with that process, then you've already won, whether the outcome is what you wanted it to be or not.
You know, Daisy, one of the things I'm thinking about, and obviously I haven't listened to this episode yet, but the idea, I often try to focus on this in many different aspects of life. Oftentimes, I think we are motivated by what I would call content, and what is actually more important for us to put some energy on is process. So even in a discussion, and I think we may have talked about this in our episode around defensiveness, that when we get too caught up in the content of me being right, you being right, who's got the right answer, we are often ignoring the more important part of the process of how we discuss this and how we listen. And that big picture, it's the process that we are going to benefit from and the winning involved in this discussion versus the content. Similarly, in other goals that we might work on, you know, as I just mentioned earlier, maybe a weight loss goal, the weekly progress on the scale, although that is a driving force for a lot of people, I believe even more important is feeling good about the process and learning the process.
Definitely.
Because that's what makes it sustainable and makes it longer term rather than just this finite goal.
Yes, absolutely. And she was saying it's the process and the skills you acquire that is what makes you successful in the long term. I thought it was interesting, we've touched on this before, where you like a theory and there are elements of it that clash with something else you think. Mm-hmm. And what she's saying about outcome basically just being luck. And I agree with that to a certain extent, but I also agree with some of the things that we've discussed about before, about the energy you put out into the universe and how that can actually influence outcomes. So it being more than just about luck. But I thought potentially those two theories actually could intertwine quite well, focusing on the process, being present. I like what she was saying about focus, how difficult it is to focus on one thing. But it's when you do that and when you're really present that you become aware of these opportunities that are there and you're better placed to take advantage of them. And you know what it's like? You know what the difference in energy, if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody and they're distracted by multiple things and they're not focused on you. It's a very different energy that you feel when you know that they're completely focused on you.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also something about early on when you were first starting to talk about this, I just really like that idea of seeing the value of both luck and the process. And I don't play poker, but that being a great example, you do need skill and you need to trust the process, and you're going to lose some hands and you're going to lose some money, and you have to be willing to accept the role of luck. But realistically, you can't expect that luck will always be in your favor. And so you have to take the influence of luck in the game while also really relying on the base of the process and the skills and the knowledge you have. And it seems like, again, a great analogy of how to approach life, that some things are totally outside of our control and we are going to have to accept the impact that they have. But if we can do that within a bigger framework of that which we do control, the process and the knowledge and the skills that we can continue to apply, it does not mean that we're then kind of blown about by luck when it's in our favor or not. I really like that analogy.
And it's also having the feeling of success by having worked hard at the process rather than basing it on the outcome. And this was the episode with how to not choke under pressure. And that's what she was talking about, wasn't it? The framing of feeling success, of feeling like you've won from playing a good game, not based on whether you won or not.
Yes.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me is, because I do have a tendency to focus on outcome and focus on trying to make that outcome as perfect as possible, trying to perfect the end product, but actually to switch my focus back to the process, back to progress. Progress, not perfection. Process, not outcome. Something I need to remind myself of, and I can definitely see the value in it. Focus on the process, focus on doing the best job you can with that. Get motivation from it, get reward from that. So find meaning and fulfillment, and just trust to luck, to whatever you want to call it, that the rest will take care of itself.
And I was going to add to that idea that if we're too focused on the outcome, it may feel overwhelming and daunting, and we may never even take the steps.
Oh, yes. Puts hands up in the air.
Yes, yes. And I think that is, something that so many of us can take from this example. So thank you.
It's a good way, actually, to think about breaking it down into the small steps. That when she was talking about having to break down her emotional reactions to things and breaking it down into the little steps, it reminds you about that with the process, that you can just focus on the next few little steps. You don't have to focus on the big picture. So it sounds like we've both found something that we find useful, we can apply to our lives. And I hope you do too. And I hope also that you have a great week. And you too, Terry.
Thank you, Daisy. Have a great one, everyone.